There are some discoveries that arrive at the worst possible time, some life-altering information delivered on mornings when you're supposed to be focused on something else entirely, some revelations so massive they make everything else seem trivial even when you're standing on a television stage in front of hundreds of people trying to play a game show. What happened when 28-year-old Marcus Thompson walked onto the Family Feud stage with his mother Diane and his extended family, trying desperately to focus on the game despite the email he'd received at 6:47 that morning that had detonated his entire understanding of his identity, was the moment during a commercial break when Steve Harvey casually asked, "You seem distracted, man, you okay?" And Marcus, who'd been holding this earthquake inside for 6 hours, unable to process it alone anymore, blurted out the truth that his DNA test results had come back that morning, that after 28 years of not knowing who his father was, he now knew that his biological father's name was Robert Mitchell, and that according to the message from 23andMe, Robert Mitchell had also tested his DNA and knew he had a son and had sent Marcus a message that morning saying he'd be in the Family Feud audience today, that he'd driven from San Diego the moment he saw Marcus's family had been selected to tape, that Marcus's biological father was sitting 15 feet away watching him right now, and Marcus didn't know what to do with any of this information. If you've ever learned something so big it made your current reality feel unreal, if you've ever wondered about a parent who was absent your whole life and then suddenly had the chance to meet them, if you've ever had to function normally while processing the biggest shock of your life, you need to hear what happened when Marcus finally spoke the truth he'd been carrying all day. Before we begin, if you believe that finding your biological parents is complicated and that DNA results can change lives in an instant, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel because we share stories about people whose worlds get turned upside down and who have to figure out how to keep standing. Marcus Thompson was born in 1996 in Los Angeles to Diane Thompson, who was 22 years old, unmarried, and had gotten pregnant during a brief relationship with a man she'd been dating for only 3 months. When Diane told the man she was pregnant, he panicked, said he wasn't ready to be a father, gave Diane some money for an abortion, and disappeared. Diane never saw him again, didn't even know his real last name. He'd told her his name was Rob Mitchell. But when she tried to find him after Marcus was born, she discovered that name didn't match any records she could find, no social media presence, nothing. He'd either given her a fake name or had disappeared so completely that he couldn't be found. Diane made the decision to keep the baby and raise him alone. She had support from her mother and sister, worked as a hairdresser, and built a life as a single mother. Marcus grew up knowing his father wasn't in the picture, knowing his mother had tried to find him and couldn't, accepting from a young age that his family was just him and his mom and his grandmother and aunt. It wasn't ideal, but it was what they had, and Marcus loved his mother fiercely, appreciated everything she'd sacrificed for him, never felt like he was missing anything essential even though he was curious about his biological father. As Marcus got older, he sometimes wondered about his father, what he looked like, whether Marcus had inherited traits from him, whether he had half-siblings somewhere, whether his father ever thought about the son he'd abandoned. But Diane knew so little about Rob Mitchell that there was nothing to search for. She couldn't even describe him in much detail. They'd met at a bar, had dated briefly. She remembered he was tall and had dark hair and worked in construction or something manual, but that was it. No photos, no contact information, just vague memories of a 3-month relationship from 1996. In 2024, when Marcus was 28, married to a woman named Lisa, working as a physical therapist, he decided to do a DNA test through 23andMe, mostly out of curiosity about his ancestry and health information, but also with a tiny hope that maybe his biological father had also done a DNA test and they'd match. Marcus knew this was unlikely. Why would a man who'd abandoned his pregnant girlfriend bother to do a DNA test? But stranger things had happened. He did the test in September 2024, sent in his sample, and mostly forgot about it as he waited for results. In late October 2024, Marcus's family had applied to be on Family Feud as a fun activity. His mother Diane's sister had suggested it, Thought it would be good for Diane, who'd been stressed with her mother, Marcus's grandmother, having health issues. The team would be Marcus, Diane, Diane's sister Carol, Carol's husband, and Marcus's wife Lisa. They were selected to tape on November 1, 2024, just 10 days after getting the confirmation. Marcus was excited, thought it would be fun, something lighthearted to distract from the stress of his grandmother's declining health. On the morning of November 1, 2024, Marcus woke up at 6:30 a.m., checked his phone out of habit, and saw he had an email from 23andMe. Your DNA results are ready. Marcus opened the email, expecting to see information about his ancestry, maybe some distant cousin matches, nothing dramatic. Instead, he saw at the top of his matches, Robert Mitchell, 49.8% DNA shared, relationship parent. Marcus stared at the screen, his brain unable to process what he was seeing. His biological father had done a 23andMe test. His biological father's real name was actually Robert Mitchell, not a fake name. His biological father existed in a findable way, and they'd just matched. Marcus clicked on the profile with shaking hands. Robert Mitchell, age 50, lived in San Diego, California. The profile picture showed a man who looked like an older version of Marcus, same facial structure, same nose, unmistakably related. Marcus sat there in bed, Lisa still asleep beside him, staring at the face of the father he'd never known, the man who'd abandoned his mother 28 years ago, and he didn't know what to feel. Anger, curiosity, grief for the relationship they'd never had. All of it simultaneously. There was a message from Robert attached to the match. Marcus, I just got these results today and I'm in shock. I'm your biological father. I didn't know you existed. Your mother told me she was pregnant in 1996, but I gave her money and assumed she had an abortion. I never knew she kept the baby. I never knew I had a son. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I want to meet you if you're willing. I saw on your profile that you're going to be on Family Feud today. I applied to be in the audience as soon as I saw that. I'll be there. I need to see you. Please give me a chance to explain. Robert. Marcus read the message 3 times, each time feeling more overwhelmed. His biological father claimed he didn't know Marcus existed, that he'd thought Diane had had an abortion, that this was news to him too. Marcus didn't know if he believed that. Couldn't Robert have followed up, checked on Diane, made sure she was okay? Or was Robert telling the truth, and he'd genuinely believed for 28 years that Diane had terminated the pregnancy? And Robert was going to be at Family Feud today, in the audience, watching Marcus, wanting to meet him. Marcus had to be on a game show in 6 hours, and he'd just learned his biological father existed and would be present, and he had no idea how to process any of this. Marcus woke Lisa, showed her the email, and she was shocked, supportive, asked what Marcus wanted to do. Marcus honestly didn't know. Part of him wanted to meet Robert, wanted answers, wanted to know why he'd abandoned Diane. Part of him was angry that Robert had the audacity to show up now after 28 years of absence. Part of him felt guilty for being curious about Robert when his mother had been the one who'd raised him, who'd sacrificed everything, who deserved his loyalty. Marcus called his mother, told her about the DNA match, about Robert claiming he didn't know Marcus existed. Diane was silent for a long moment, then said quietly, I told him I was pregnant. He gave me money for an abortion, but I never confirmed to him whether I went through with it or not. I was too hurt that he offered money instead of support. So I guess it's possible he assumed I'd terminated. But Marcus, he should have checked. He should have made sure I was okay. That's what a decent person would have done. Marcus agreed, but also understood the situation was more complex than he'd thought. If Robert genuinely believed Diane had terminated the pregnancy, then from Robert's perspective, he'd just learned he had a 28-year-old son. That would be shocking, overwhelming, would explain why Robert had rushed to the Family Feud taping desperate to see Marcus. Marcus told his mother about Robert being in the audience, asked if she wanted Marcus to refuse to meet him, to leave before the taping. Diane, to her credit, said, Marcus, this is your decision. Robert is your biological father whether I like it or not. If you want to meet him, you should meet him. I won't be hurt. I know I'm your mom. I know I raised you. Meeting him doesn't change that. Marcus decided he'd go to the taping, would try to get through the game show, and would deal with Robert afterward. He didn't tell the rest of his family about the DNA results. His aunt and uncle and grandmother didn't know, and Marcus didn't have the energy to explain it before the show. He'd tell them later. At the studio that morning, Marcus was barely functional, his mind consumed with the knowledge that somewhere in the audience his biological father was sitting, watching him, a stranger who shared 50% of his DNA, but whom Marcus had never met, never spoken to, knew nothing about beyond a name and a face in a photo. During the pre-show briefing, Marcus couldn't focus, kept scanning the audience looking for someone who matched Robert's profile photo, but there were hundreds of people and he couldn't find him. When they walked onto the stage, Marcus was operating on autopilot, smiling mechanically, trying to seem normal while internally he was screaming. Steve Harvey greeted the family, worked his way down the line, and when he got to Marcus he noticed immediately that something was off. "You okay, man? You look like you're somewhere else." Marcus tried to deflect. "Just nervous. First time on TV." But Steve, who'd been doing this long enough to read people, pressed gently. "It's more than nerves. What's going on?" They started playing the game and Marcus was terrible, missing easy answers, unable to focus, his performance so off that his family kept asking if he was feeling sick. During the first commercial break, Steve walked over to Marcus and spoke quietly. "Seriously, man, are you okay? Do you need to sit down? You're not here mentally." And Marcus, who'd been holding this inside for 6 hours, who couldn't carry it alone anymore, who needed someone to know what he was dealing with, said, "I got my DNA test results this morning. I found my biological father. He's here, in the audience, right now, and I've never met him before. I didn't even know he existed until 647 this morning." The silence that followed was immediate and total. Steve Harvey's face went from concern to shock to something like awe. "What? Say that again." Marcus, the words pouring out now that he'd started, explained. "I've never known my father. My mom raised me alone. She said he disappeared when she told him she was pregnant. I did a 23andMe test last month just for ancestry information, and the results came back this morning showing a parent match to a man named Robert Mitchell. He messaged me saying he didn't know I existed, that he thought my mom had an abortion, and that he saw I'd be on Family Feud today, so he rushed here to be in the audience because he wanted to see me. And he's here right now, somewhere in this audience, and I'm supposed to be playing Family Feud, but all I can think about is that my biological father is watching me and I don't know what to do." Steve Harvey stood frozen, his hand over his mouth, staring at Marcus as the magnitude of what he was hearing sank in. The crew had stopped what they were doing, everyone listening to Marcus's confession. Diane, Marcus's mother, had tears streaming down her face, understanding now why her son had been so distracted, feeling guilty she'd encouraged him to still come to the taping. Lisa, Marcus's wife, held his hand, supporting him through this revelation. Steve finally found his voice. "Marcus, you found out this morning, and you came here anyway and tried to play a game show." Marcus nodded. "I didn't know what else to do. We'd been planning this for weeks. My family was excited. I thought I could just push through it, deal with it after. But I can't focus. I keep looking at the audience trying to figure out which person is him." Steve turned to the audience, his voice commanding. "Is Robert Mitchell here? If you're Robert Mitchell, Marcus's biological father, you need to stand up right now." For a moment, nothing happened, and Marcus thought maybe Robert hadn't actually come, maybe he'd changed his mind. Then a man in the 4th row stood up slowly. He was tall, in his 50s, with dark hair graying at the temples, and his face was unmistakably related to Marcus. The same eyes, the same jawline, the same expression Marcus saw when he looked in the mirror. Robert's face showed he was crying, his hand pressed to his mouth, staring at Marcus with an intensity that was almost painful to witness. Steve beckoned him forward. "Come here. Come up here." Robert moved toward the stage, navigating through the rows of audience members, and when he got to the edge of the stage, he stopped, looking at Marcus like he couldn't believe he was real. Marcus stared back, seeing his own features reflected in this stranger's face, and couldn't speak, couldn't move. Steve addressed Robert directly. "You're Robert Mitchell. You're Marcus's biological father." Robert nodded, his voice breaking. "Yes, I just found out this morning that I have a son. I've had a son for 28 years and I didn't know, I thought. I gave his mother money for an abortion in 1996, and I never heard from her again, and I assumed that meant she'd terminated the pregnancy. I never knew there was a child. I never knew I had a son until I got the DNA match this morning." Steve's voice was firm, almost stern. "But you should have followed up. You should have made sure Diane was okay, checked on the situation, been a man about it instead of just giving her money and walking away." Robert's face showed shame and agreement. "You're right. I was 22 years old and scared and selfish, and I handled it the worst possible way. I should have followed up. I should have been there. I can't defend what I did. All I can say is I didn't know, and if I had known, I hope I would have stepped up. I'll never know now because I can't change the past." Steve turned to Marcus. "What do you want to do? He's here. Your biological father is standing right there. Do you want to talk to him? Do you want him to leave? This is your call." Marcus looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly, giving him permission to make whatever choice he needed. Marcus looked back at Robert, this man who was genetically his father but was a complete stranger, and found his voice. "I have questions. I have a lot of questions, but I can't do this right now. I can't process meeting my biological father for the first time on a game show stage in front of hundreds of people. Can we talk after, privately?" Robert nodded immediately. "Yes, absolutely. Whatever you need. I'll wait as long as you need. I needed to see you. I needed you to know I exist and that I'm sorry I wasn't there and that I want to be part of your life if you'll let me." Marcus's voice was thick with emotion. "I don't know if I want you in my life. I don't know you. You're a stranger who happens to share my DNA. My mom is my family. She's the one who raised me. She's the one who was there for everything. You weren't there, whether you knew about me or not, and I don't know if I can just welcome you and like that's okay." Robert's face showed he understood, that he'd expected this. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness or instant acceptance. I just want a chance to explain, to tell you my side, to know you if you'll let me. That's all I'm asking." Steve Harvey, who'd been listening to this exchange with tears running down his face, made a decision. "We're stopping the show. This is more important than Family Feud. Marcus needs time to process this, needs space to decide what he wants. We're giving this family the rest of the day off. The taping is postponed." He turned to the producers. "Get them a private room. Let them talk. Give them whatever time they need." Over the next 3 hours, in a private room at the studio, Marcus and Robert talked for the first time. Lisa and Diane were there too, both as support and as witnesses, and the conversation was painful and honest and complex. Robert explained his side that in 1996 he'd been 22, working construction, barely making it financially, and when Diane told him she was pregnant, after dating for just 3 months, he'd panicked. He'd given her money for an abortion, because that seemed like the solution that would let them both move on with their lives, and when Diane had cut off contact after that, he'd assumed it meant she'd terminated the pregnancy and wanted nothing more to do with him. He'd felt guilty about it over the years, had wondered sometimes how Diane was, but had never followed up because he'd been a coward, had been afraid of what he might learn, had convinced himself the situation was resolved. He'd gotten married in 2001, had 2 daughters Zellers, which meant Marcus had half-sisters, had built a life, and had honestly not thought much about that brief relationship in 1996 until he'd done a 23andMe test in October 2024 out of curiosity about his ancestry. When the results came back showing he had a son, he'd been devastated, shocked, immediately wanted to meet Marcus, wanted to somehow make up for 28 years of absence he hadn't even known about. Marcus listened, asked questions, tried to decide if he believed Robert's story. Robert had no reason to lie now. The DNA proved paternity. There was nothing to gain from making up a story about not knowing. But Marcus also felt angry that Robert hadn't followed up, hadn't made sure Diane was okay, had chosen the easy path of assumption rather than the difficult path of responsibility. Diane spoke too, explained her side, that she had told Robert she was pregnant, but that when he'd offered abortion money instead of support, she'd been too hurt and angry to tell him when she decided to keep the baby. She admitted she could have reached out after Marcus was born, could have demanded child support, could have forced Robert to be involved, but her pride and hurt had prevented that. She took responsibility for her part in Robert not knowing about Marcus, acknowledged that if she'd insisted on contact, Robert would have known he had a son. The conversation was messy and painful, with all three adults acknowledging they'd made mistakes, that the situation was complex, that there were no clear villains or heroes, just people who'd been young and scared and had made choices that had led to 28 years of a child growing up without his father. By the end of the conversation, Marcus had made some decisions. He was willing to get to know Robert, willing to build some kind of relationship, but it would be slow on Marcus's terms, and there were no guarantees. Robert accepted this gratefully, said he'd take whatever Marcus was willing to give, that he understood he had to earn a place in Marcus's life rather than expecting to be welcomed immediately. They exchanged phone numbers, made plans to talk again the following week, and Robert met his two daughters, Marcus's half-sisters, via video call, beginning the process of integrating Marcus into the family he'd existed in genetically but not relationally for 28 years. The Family Feud taping was rescheduled for the following week, and this time Marcus was able to focus, able to play, able to be present. His family won their match, and Steve Harvey acknowledged what had happened the previous week, thanked Marcus for his courage in speaking the truth about finding his father that morning, said that some things were more important than television, and that he was grateful they'd been able to give Marcus the time and space he needed to begin processing this massive life change. The story went viral when Family Feud aired a special segment about it 3 months later. With Marcus and Robert's permission, they interviewed both men about the experience, about finding each other through DNA testing, about the complicated emotions of a reunion that was both joyful and painful, about building a relationship from nothing when you're already adults. The response was overwhelming, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of finding biological parents through DNA tests, of navigating complex family relationships, of learning that their origin stories were different from what they'd believed. 2 years later, in 2026, Marcus had a cautious but growing relationship with Robert and his half-sisters. Robert wasn't dad. That felt wrong for a man who hadn't raised him, but he was family, a connection that mattered, someone Marcus was learning to know and even like. Diane had made peace with Robert's presence in Marcus's life, understanding that Marcus having a relationship with his biological father didn't diminish her role or her importance. And Marcus had learned something important, that biology creates connection, but relationship requires work, that finding your biological parents doesn't solve identity questions but can provide context, and that it's possible to honor both the family who raised you and the family who created you without choosing between them. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that DNA tests can change lives in an instant, that finding biological parents is complex and emotional, and that some revelations arrive at the worst possible times but still have to be dealt with, hit that like button and share this video. Subscribe to our channel because we share stories about people whose lives change overnight, about family being more complicated than DNA, about navigating impossible situations with as much grace as possible. Marcus Thompson learned he'd found his biological father at 6:47 a.m. on the morning he was supposed to tape Family Feud, discovered his father would be in the audience, and tried to function normally while processing the biggest shock of his life. When he finally told Steve Harvey during a commercial break, when the audience gasped hearing that Marcus had discovered his father that very morning, when Robert stood up and they saw each other for the first time, we all learned that DNA doesn't make someone a parent, but it does create connection, that biological fathers who were absent have to earn their place in their children's lives, and that some reunions are complicated and messy and don't have simple resolutions. That's why the show stopped, why Steve gave Marcus time, why everyone understood this was more important than entertainment, because finding your biological parent after 28 years of absence isn't a moment of pure joy, but a complex beginning that requires time and space and honesty to navigate.